Welcome back to the Get Out of Your Comfort Zone video series. I'm Andy Molinsky, and I'm here with you today with Ron. I'm here today with Ron Carucci, who is a seasoned consultant for more than 25 years. He's got experience working with CEOs, senior executives of organizations ranging from Fortune 50s to startups, all sorts of organizations. He's consulted to some of the world's most influential CEOs and executives on issues ranging from strategy to organization to leadership. He has very, very broad and deep experience in a variety of areas. He's also a former faculty member at Fordham University's Graduate School in New York, where he was an associate professor of organizational behavior. He's a writer. He's many, many things. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Ron. Thank you so much, and I would love to hear some stories or examples about when you have had to step outside your comfort zone, and then we can go from there.
Sure. Andy, so great to be with you. Thanks for having me. So two stories come to mind, and they're intentionally later in life stories for the folks out there who think your comfort zone window is limited to be disrupted. So about 12 years ago, I was leaving a major consulting firm to set out and start my own firm with some friends. The firm I am with now, Navalent. At the same time, I was on the board of a startup graduate school in Seattle. I lived in New York at the time. And I didn't at the time really fully appreciate how startup the graduate school was. My experience with academia was limited. It was I would, as an adjunct, go in, teach, and come out. I never had to deal with all of the very unique, no offense, but the very unique swim lanes and politics and
no offense taken.
Oddities of academia. So anyway, about 2.5 years into my time on the board, the chairman said to me, look, we need someone to come and run the school. This thing needs to grow up. It needs to mature. It needs a lot of different things. That's not what people here are meant to do. Will you consider stepping off the board and coming and running the school? And I said, no, thank you. Thanks. Very flattered, but that's not my thing. Appreciate you asking. They asked 9 more times.
Persistent.
To say the least.
Yeah.
And in a moment of, I don't know what, weakness, I don't know what it was, but in a moment of, I talked to friends, I vented to my wife, I got lots of people to sort of be on my side, but some of the signals said you should at least consider it. So I said to my chairman, okay, I'm reluctantly going to tell you I would at least get into the conversation, but only if the following things were true. And I put on what I thought was such an impossible list of conditions that it would force him to say, sorry, we can't do that, and then I'd be off the hook. But that's not how it worked out. And so they're like, no problem, anything else? So I said, you have to interview other candidates. I'm not qualified for this. Anyway,
So let me interrupt. So it sounds like this, because I think this story is, you could substitute the specifics of the story, but it's a very familiar story to a lot of us, right? We're asked to step into a position that, whenever we grow or develop in our careers and our jobs, we're often asked, or the next step would involve something that where we don't have the skills, right? So what were your fears, if you had to kind of dig in, what do you think your fears would have been?
Well, first of all, it was the first time in my life I was being asked to do something I didn't want to do.
Right.
Usually the career choices I've made were things I pursued. Even if I was recruited or pursued, I had desire for what was being offered. I did not want this role. It was a school of theology and psychology. I'm not a theologian. I'm not a clinician. I'm not an academician. I had no PhD. And I was a New Yorker, and they're in Seattle. So every form of outsiderness you could have, I had. I didn't appreciate how unformed the organization was. So, moving my family across the country, we had just built our home. We had just settled in a community. I had the great school, community, church, my firm. It was like we built this idyllic life, and now 3 years or 4 years into it, we're going to blow it up and go to like another part of the world. So all of that disruption, at a time in my life where I'm like, I'm looking to sort of like, ride the wave here now, not like have it crest on me. So all of that change at once for so many precedents. And then sure enough, as I got into the role, started turning over rocks and realizing, whoa, this thing is really not built. It wasn't poorly built. It just wasn't built. Basic process.
Do you feel you were deceived then, or you just kind of didn't know what you're getting
No, I
into?
think I was naive.
Yeah,
I think they just didn't know what they didn't know as a board. And I was on the board, and I was the one that started saying, hey, basic, or like I'm a psych guy, right? So I'm like, well, let's start with strategy. Any systems model starts with direction. What do we have one? Do we want one? How's that? Where are we going? Crickets. So then it was, well, so we don't really have an organization here. We have a bunch of people doing like everything. We have students who are coming for degrees. We have various levels of accreditation processes. We're in an office park for a campus that a lease is going to run out on in 2 years. I had people doing financial work who were really accountants. I had people doing major administrative work who were barely secretaries. It was just a variety of a mess.
So when you stepped in there, did you feel, overwhelmed, confused? Like, how did you sort of make sense of it and then move forward?
What the hell did I get myself into? Question was pretty common. Well, the interesting thing, Andy, was of all the emotions I felt, mostly not positive ones, interestingly enough, I had to make a choice that regret would not be one of them. I really couldn't look back. It was too big a leap, too big a disruption for my family, my kids, my life, to ever go, maybe this wasn't for me.
Right.
Because that's a dark path. There was a lot of dark paths, a lot of dark days of tearing my hair out. I used to have a lot more of it.
I hear
you. But I could not let that one allure me because I knew I would die. I was also a professor of leadership, so I was also teaching and building the leadership curriculum. But all of the questions I'd bring to the table were questions that the academics are not used to asking. Basic questions of discipline. And, one of the degrees the school offers, as an example, was an MDiv. And they were fighting to keep it, and there was this debate about ditch it, keep it.
What's MDiv? A Master's in Divinity?
Master's in Divinity,
okay, yeah.
Which is a terminal degree. It's like the MBA of nonprofits.
Right.
It's a big degree. It's an expensive degree, and many schools, especially seminaries, are getting out of it. And so I'm naturally asking questions they don't think about. Like I'm asking, for example, why is everybody else getting out of this business? Why do we want to be in it? Other than our students want it.
Well, can I pause for a second? Because this is really interesting. So you actually, it sounds here like you're like in the story you're telling right now that you weren't overwhelmed. You were actually sort of in some ways embracing your outsider status and saying, wait a second, I've got a perspective here. Despite the fact that I'm not all these things, I might have something to add. Is that true? Or
that's very true, Andy. But what I didn't do was to see if that was working for them.
I see. Interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have no choice but to use I have to use what I can bring to the table.
Right.
Very limited though it is.
Right.
On running an academic organization of people who, by the way, didn't want to be led. They didn't want a new boss. They didn't want to be led. They were very comfortable in this chaotic, frenetic, startup to grow up of any place is hard. And when you impose discipline and structures and trade-offs and accountability into an environment that hasn't had it before, they don't like it.
Right.
And they certainly don't like the person bringing it. And I was a New Yorker, so I didn't bring it in very kind, gentle, passive-aggressive ways they were used to. So I'm asking questions as an outsider, to your point, that I think are reasonable to ask. And I'm getting all the passive-aggressive nodding. So I think they want to ask these questions. Like, for an example, why are 55% of the credits of a 90-credit degree devoted to 10% of a job they're going to do? That seems a little strange to me. It's the way it's always done. So anyway, it was just one of many disruptions I was having to bring. And every form of disruption, as a person who thinks about org change all the time, I was forgetting I'm not a consultant here. Right? I'm one of them.
You have to do it,
and I'm behaving, I'm taking on the otherness they're giving me, and I'm making them more isolated, more estranged from me. And so it just became this very tense sense of doing everything I thought I knew to do about building commitment to change and bring people on board. But when someone's looking at you and thinks you are their boss with all the authority they have, I know this, I tell my clients this, but not myself. You can't treat them like they're clients. You have to treat them like they're people you are leading.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah.
And I was missing all those tea leaves.
So let me pause here because I know you have another story and I want to hear about it. It's a really good. Your second story is equally as interesting, different. But let me just pause and just ask if you sort of reflect back on the situation you just described. Like, what did you learn? What would you say are some takeaways out of the experience of having to act outside your comfort zone in this situation? What it was like, what you learned. Some takeaways.
Yeah. Andy, so there's a lot of tapes in your head that play in those moments, right? Tapes of contempt, tapes of second guessing, tapes of frustration, tapes of being judged, so judging back, and getting all that underbrush. Gosh, in hindsight, if I could have been much more aware that was happening, much more aware of how I was responding to my own self-imposed fears, and stepping and sort of isolating myself and embracing all of their resistance and being paralyzed by it.
You know what it reminds me of? It's funny, when you're talking, sorry to interrupt, I guess I'm a New Yorker too. Actually from Boston. Similar. You know what it reminds me of, actually? It reminds me of, and I don't know, it's probably on my mind because I'm a huge sports fan, and it's the NFL playoff season. And it reminds me of sort of like a novice, quarterback going into a huge playoff game, and just everything is moving fast and way too fast. But if you're a real seasoned player like Tom Brady, my favorite, they always describe it as that everything slows down. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And it sounds like that was just going through my head as you were talking, that things weren't slowing down for you in the sense that you couldn't reflect, you couldn't, you sort of were firefighting. Is that kind of the way to...
Well, great. It's a great metaphor. And being in Seattle, go Hawks today against Atlanta, right? But I think the reason those seasoned quarterbacks think that, and so do seasoned leaders, is because they take control and make it slow down and control the pace. I got swept up into the freneticism of the organization and how they use that freneticism to dodge the imposition of maturity.
It's interesting, yeah.
And I didn't reverse it.
Interesting. All right.
My own sense of inadequacy. I'm in huge imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah.
That they rub my face in all the time. I just took it and didn't say, wait a minute. Okay, so I am in charge here. I am the president. It's my deal. I'm going to be that. You don't have to, and just sort of took control the velocity, control the pace, made the choices, and not worried about the consequences of that, and just, push the change that was needed instead of, getting in my head. It's also it's like a clinical school, so you have a bunch of clinical students who are all into how everybody's feeling and making sure everybody's okay and all that. And so I just got swept up into the culture and ethos that was there. And probably went native too quickly, rather than bringing the change I could have brought. So I got a lot done in 5 years. By a lot of standards, it was fine. But boy, was it a rough 5 years.
So it's a very interesting story. And I just want to make one last comment, and then let's transition. And the comment is just when you said imposter syndrome, I think a lot of us experience that. Stepping into a new situation, we feel we're a wannabe, a poser. I've written a lot about it. In my new book, Reach, I talk a lot about it. But what I find actually interesting in your case, which I think is true of the imposter syndrome as well, that there is sort of a hidden upside to being a novice, which is that you can bring an outsider's perspective, a fresh perspective. And in this case, it sounds like they could have used a fresh perspective. So as much as you might feel like you're inadequate and that you're ill-equipped for the role, you also might have some assets, like a new experience, to bring to that role that you can't underappreciate in some ways. Do you know what I mean?
It's a two-edged sword, Andy. It's great to be the outsider who can be the fresh eyes and ask the dumb questions and be dumb about that. But if you haven't earned the trust or built a relationship to let them be recipients of those questions, which can feel to them like indictments,
it's interesting.
Like harsh judgments, like critique, then your outsider questions aren't very useful if nobody wants to find answers to them.
Right. Very interesting. All right, let's transition. I don't want to lose your second story here, but that's really that sounds like an amazing experience. I mean, painful, but really a great life experience.
In hindsight, I'm not sorry I did it. I learned a ton. I stretched and grew in ways I would have never ever discovered of myself in having stayed in New York and on the path I was on. So while there's scar tissue in places that we didn't know could be scarred, the scars have borne great fruit in my life in a lot of very surprising and good ways. So I choose gratitude for that season.
So let's hear about your second story.
Fast forward 12 years.
12 years,
so,
okay, yeah.
But you actually been 11 years. So fast forward 7 years out of school. Last year, I'm one of three managing partners at a firm called Navalent. We're a firm that does strategy, organization, and leadership work. Been very successful, have a great reputation, all passionate about our work. But in a boutique firm, you have to at least try and be selective about your clients. That you choose ones you can help, choose ones that aren't sociopaths, and choose ones that when you see their name in the caller ID, you don't roll your eyes and get the Tums. But I felt like at the point I was at in my career, that should have come easier, right? I should have been able to have clients finding me that I would want to work with, and that wasn't happening to the degree I thought it should be. And I was frustrated because I thought I was doing all of the things one would do to make that happen. I was writing and publishing. I was speaking. I had 8 books. Some had been my last one had been a great bestseller, and I thought, well, gosh, isn't that what it takes? Now people will find me. That's not how it works. It turns out that's never how it works. So I, in a moment of angst, and moment of I'm at a place in my life where I want this to be different, hired help. So it's always good for the coach to hire a coach, for the thought leader to hire a thought leader of thought leaders. And I found an extraordinary one, the woman who introduced you and I, Dory Clark. And at first I started stalking her on LinkedIn, and then I had the courage to connect, and we had a Skype call, and I told her I think I may have a referral client for you. And then it acknowledged it was me.
I have a friend.
Yeah, you might want to meet him. I think you could help him. And turns out I was right about that. So so we began with a diagnostic effort, like all good clients, consultants go look under the hood. And it was interesting. The whole time I was processing wow, this is what I do. This is what it's like to be on the other side of me, to take my own medicine. Dory and I just co-authored a piece on the backstage messy making of a thought leader. And we co-wrote the narrative of here's all the neuroticism that comes out of the person trying to become one, and all the angst and work it is to change.
Where is this? I'd like to see it. Is it out yet?
It's not out yet. We just finished it. Put the final out, and we'll publish it probably very soon.
Good. All right. We'll look out for it.
It was fun to co-create it from both sides of the table, right? So from here's what the coach is saying, and here's what the coachee is having to do.
Yeah.
So I honestly had no idea what I was getting myself into. I had no concept of what she was going to ask me to do. Her diagnosis was sharp, incisive, painful, and so true. And at that point, I'd only agreed to the data. So I said, "Oh, okay. Well, do you think this is helpable?" She goes, "Yes." So for an example, one of her points of a diagnostic was, well, you're only I could not find you. If your goal was to be the best kept secret, you've done a great job. I could not get to you. Why are you only talking to people who already know you? If you want to attract the kinds of clients you want, you have to go talk to them. I'm like, oh, okay, well, where are they? She said, well, why aren't you writing for Harvard Business Review? Why aren't you writing for Forbes? Why aren't you writing for the PR articles? I said, well, that's an interesting idea. I'm fairly confident if I just call them up and say, hey, I want to write for you, they're not going to take my calls. She goes, oh, no, they wouldn't at all. But if I introduce you to the editors, they will. And I'm like, oh, that's how this works? Oh! So she introduced me to the editors there, and I, anxious and nervous, like, how's this going to go? Pitched, and I started writing. Now, so in 12 months, I've written 52 articles for HBR and Forbes.
That's great.
So fast forward, she says, okay, now we need to sort of start building your peer set. I said, what does that mean? She goes, well, who are the thought leaders you really respect? Who are the people that have shaped your work, your life? You admire their thinking? I'm like, well, not many of them. A lot of hacks out there. She goes, okay, but who? So I did some dig thinking, so I came up with names like Daniel Kahneman, Jonathan Haidt, people who's like, are stratospherically brilliant and whatever. She goes, great, I want you to reach out to them and interview them for your Forbes column. Like, you want me to what? She goes, yeah, reach out to them and interview them and write an article based on your interview. I'm like, are you out of your mind? They're not going to take my call. She goes, just do it. I said, Dory, they're not. Why would they talk to me? She goes, just do it. I'm like, no, I'm not going to embarrass myself in front of these people. She goes, go on their websites. And they were like, at that time, they were like, I picked 6 of them. Reach out to them, tell them who you are, write for Forbes, and tell them you want to interview them. Just see what happens. She goes, just humor me. So I did it, and dang if they all didn't say yes.
Wow. That doesn't surprise me, actually.
There I am on the phone with Daniel Kahneman, and barely keeping a limit, trying to ask questions, and fascinated.
Right.
And now, fast forward, so I'm now on Jonathan Haidt's advisory board, and I work with him at NYU on ethics and stuff projects there. The man's a brilliant man, great guy. I have written several articles on the work of their ethical systems. I've interviewed folks like Susan Cain, and just published an interview today with Roz Savage, the solo woman rower of the world. I got to meet the most amazing people. And only one person's ever said no to an interview because they're kind of burnt out on interviews. Everybody else has been gracious and kind and said yes. And I'm like, wow. But honestly, Andy, if you had said to me a year ago at the time I was transitioning out of the diagnostic work with her, just so you know what's going to happen in the next 15 months of the following things, I would have said, which brand of cocaine are you smoking? It would have never imagined. And at every step, it's been this sense of gulp, gulp. And now to go, whoa, it's no wonder everything I was doing wasn't working. I wasn't doing any of the things somebody who wants to use thought leadership to distinguish themselves and attract great clients does to do that. I don't know what I thought. I don't know where I got the notions from. They were diluted, but I was nowhere near the path. And I thought I was center on it, right? So to have to live in the gap between, at this point in my career, how could I have been so off? That's one narrative. Another narrative of imposter syndrome of no one's going to, this is not me, but I want it to become me. It's a voice I want to learn to use. So, there's a point at which in your late 40s, early 50s, you don't go back to school and learn new things. You refine the things you know. And so to have to break that paradigm and go, I am learning a whole new set of things that then you have to always deal with the, should have learned this 10 years ago. Should have learned this 15 years ago. And you put that aside to go, but you're in it now, so just get on with it. In one of our first strategy sessions, and Dory was brilliant in how she sort of got this. She was very deceptive in how she got this stuff out of me. So we're sitting in the Harvard Club in New York City, and we're talking. It's our first session of sort of setting strategy together. And she's saying, okay, and she's very incisive and bullish on the objectives, right? So you want to attract higher quality clients that you want to work with in the following criteria. Yep, got it. So tell me about 2 clients you've had in your life that you work with that you would love more of. What were the stories? What did you do for them? How did you advise them? How did you have impact? Why they like you? Blah, blah. And so I just start rambling stories. And she's typing feverishly. And I think she's like any good consultant, just taking notes. Finish this two stories of 2 clients I would love more of. She goes, great. Here's your next 15-week editorial calendar for Forbes. I'm like, what? And she starts reading off these titles. So I told one story of an executive who I'd followed from one company to another, CEO. And when he got to this new company, it was fish out of water because the executive team and he had very different values. And that wasn't, he was surprised and shocked and off balance by that. How a CEO leads a team with different values. So she was extracting these insights from things that I don't even give a thought to from the story. She's saying, if you want to attract these kinds of leaders to work with you, you have to write about the things they find helpful. And the way you know about what they find helpful is to look at what has been helpful to them before and write about them. Now, at first you kind of go, well, duh. I would have no more thought about that than the man in the moon. It would have never occurred to me. So for me, it's like the other comfort zone that was expanding was, wow, help is really good. Having another set of eyes on your life and your work as a Sherpa is a great thing because this is really uncomfortable for me. But if I had to do it and think about it or think to do it, that would have never happened.
So let's pause for a second because this is a really interesting story where it sounds like you have really gone outside your comfort zone, but you've had the help of a guide and a mentor, not only to show you the way, but was there. So it sounds like she is a good example of someone who's given you very tactical, incisive, insightful, surprising advice. How about emotionally, I guess, like psychologically, like how else is it, whether it's, how she or someone like her can help sort of bring you along outside your comfort zone. Can you say a few words about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had, in fact, the piece we co-wrote has a lot of that neuroticism in it. One of the things she did graciously was she just didn't tolerate it. So when I would say to her, when I'd be in one of my, I'm just so late to the party here, she'd go, Ron, we're all late to the party. We all should have been on Twitter in 1990, whatever. We all should have been on LinkedIn. We all should have been here much sooner. We weren't. Get over it. So she would be gracious.
So she's the voice in your head that you wish you had in some ways.
And you know what? She's like, now, one of the things I told her, she has the most uncommon sense of agency I've ever seen in 40 years of work. She just, it's not just self-confidence, because she's incredibly generous and humble too, but her own sense of efficacy and agency is like in a galaxy category somewhere else. And so for people, I mean, you probably saw this when you interviewed her, for people to have a role model like that, of someone who believes not just that she's arrogant, thinks she can do anything, but when she sets her mind to something because she wants to do it, like write Broadway musicals or go be a stand-up comic. I mean, she's done, her life is an amazing array of stuff. She just does it.
So for you, so having a role model, so if we go back to comfort zones, having someone to sort of temporarily supply that confidence boost to kind of push you forward, right, to nudge you forward, but knowing that she's the safety net there, like she said to you, go try it, go email these people, see what they say. And the implication, by the way, I imagine, is that, and if they all reject you, I'll be here and we can talk about it. You know what I mean? Like, so there's like a safety net.
What she probably would have said was, okay, try 6 more.
Right, exactly.
Right. So and she'd written her books about this stuff. The other thing that was credible to me was she practiced what she'd preached. These are all the things she had done to build her practice.
Yeah.
Right. So she wasn't making this stuff up.
No. I know.
But to have the person to when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I have a client. I mean, just from a capacity point of view, I can't write 3 articles, work on publishing, on promoting a book. I have my own firm, has their own blog I have to write for, and I have all these clients I need to do work for. Right. So when we came up, even the question of bandwidth, she had ideas for. Right. So you're stretching capacity, you're stretching capability, you're stretching reach, you're stretching a voice, and in all these directions, she had answers.
Well, this is really,
the thing I love about her, she never has the presumption that her answers are right, to be adopted. She always gives you permission to not listen to her.
Right.
Feel free to reject this advice. She's always incredibly gracious, and so for me, she's a decade younger than me, right? So that's awkward and generationally weird, right? But I'm fine with that. I've written about cross-generational relationships, and I think we have to have a mutual mentoring thing here. So I was okay with that. But for her to honor my expertise and go, this may not work for you. And there's been times I thought, okay, that's a great idea. That is not for me. There's been times I've had to sort of conclude that and not feel guilty for it or not feel bad about not doing what she said. But for every one of those, there's been 10 places where I've neurotically, reluctantly taken on what she said to do. And every time I've done that, it has produced great things.
So let me pause here.
That shocked me.
So we have to wind down here, but I'm really struck by your story. And I guess in part I'm struck by the emotion, the passion that you show in telling it. It sounds like having when we're talking about comfort zones, it is hard to take that leap. And in your first story, you took the leap, but you were taking the leap without that sort of guide, in a sense, that person to kind of help shepherd you through. And I imagine the goal ultimately is teach someone to fish so that they can then fish on their own, so to speak.
Yeah.
You didn't have that, and it's very interesting when you retell this current story, how the emotion in your voice, the passion in your voice, I think is just really reflective of how meaningful that person has been for you.
It's a great observation, Andy, and it's a couple of reasons. One, it's still fresh. I just re-upped for my second year with her, so now I'm like, okay, where does this adventure go from here?
Yeah.
Right. I haven't plateaued anywhere. And secondly, it's even at this point in my career, where I have 30 years of experience, where people are coming to me for patterns and answers, I'm still discovering new things. Right. So the notion of I can still learn new things. I mean, I learned to ski at 42 years old when I moved to Seattle, thinking, well, if I'm going to blend in here, they all ski, I have to learn how to ski. And so that's not easy to do with no muscle memory at that age, right? But I forced myself, and symbolically, it was this emotional victory of I can conquer Seattle. I can come here, and so learning new things for me is sacred for me. So to be in a place where I'm learning things I actually chose to want to learn, as difficult as they sometimes are, and as all those narratives in your head try and resist you have to push past them. And yes, absolutely, to see fruit and to have help. I would tell anybody who's taking leaps of faith off of bridges or whatever they're stepping into outside whatever's comfortable or familiar to them, have help. There is no badge of honor in solo jumping.
Yeah. Well, this is great. Those are both excellent stories, very relevant to our series, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time.
And the
I
pleasure's
really
mine.
enjoyed
Good luck with the book. And I hope a lot of comfort zones expand well because of your work.
it. Thank you.